Jared Ogden is the CEO of Triumph Systems. And we've talked about Triumph before. You can find them at triumph-systems.com or follow the URL that's there in the lower third. And Jared Ogden, of course, he's a retired Navy SEAL, Eagle Scout as well. And he's a decorated veteran and Bronze Star V for Valor. He founded Triumph Systems in 2015. And of course, he works with law enforcement now. He trains for discernment, de-escalation, and response tactics. And he joins us via Skype. Jared, it's good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Good to see you too, Dana.
Okay, we may have his screen froze because he's making a very serious face, so we'll reestablish that. But we got him audio anyway. Jared, let me first ask you: Did you watch this video of the police engagement with Dewante Wright? And if so, what were your initial takeaways from it?
I did watch the video in its entirety, so I got the dash cam perspective, the body camera perspective, and the first thing that I thought was, this is exactly what happened in Ladue, just outside of St. Louis, a few years ago. Actually, very close to my wife's brick and mortar store at Schnucks grocery store. The cops were called for someone suspected of shoplifting, and a 20-year experienced veteran police officer responded and intended to tase the suspect who was not listening. And instead of drawing her taser, she drew her pistol and shot the alleged shoplifter. So that's the first thing that I thought of. And the reason why is we see these types of headlines all too often. And in my opinion, this really comes down to a training issue. If you want to address the problem, if you want to address the root cause, it's a training issue. That officer announced that she was going to tase the suspect. What I think that she was experiencing in that moment, which all of our law enforcement, they don't know what they're going to encounter during a traffic stop. They don't know what they're going to encounter when they put on their uniform. And it could be routine, or they could enter into what I call combat stress. And a combat stress is not when you go to Starbucks and the barista messes up your latte. Okay, that might stress out a lot of people. Or it should be a 5-minute wait and they messed it up, so now it's 15 minutes late and you're running late to your spa appointment. That's not combat stress. Combat stress, it simply put, is fight or flight. And most people, thank God, don't know what that is, but I do. And these officers, they respond to situations and they find themselves in these combat stress events. And simply put, they're not trained. They're not trained to deal with that.
Yeah, that's a very big point. We're talking with Jared Ogden, retired Navy SEAL and CEO of Triumph Systems. And not only do they make targets, which are really cool, you should go check out, but also he goes and he trains and he advises police departments who need it. Because these situations, you mentioned the stress that comes up. That's what I hear, and I understand that there are millions of these engagements or millions of stops every year, and that these instances are rare. And you shouldn't have to preface analysis of this situation by always having to acknowledge that should be understood. But with something like this, that's when that muscle memory comes into play. Now, you've always said you don't rise to the challenge. No one ever rises to the challenge. You always fall back on your highest level of training. That's when that muscle memory, that's when your training will carry you. And I just don't know how, when you have your taser on your left side and your handgun on your right side, I guess it was just, I don't know how long she's carried a taser. I think that information should be made public. But I mean, I guess that duress, my question is that duress, is that going to be enough to where you can't even tell the difference from the weight of the taser from the weight of the handgun?
Well, good training should address that, but let me first explain what combat stress feels like to the individual experiencing it. So first, you go from a normal resting heart rate to over 200 beats per minute. So you've got this adrenaline flowing through your body very, very quickly. And one of the first things that it does is it deteriorates or degrades a lot of your sensories, a lot of your inputs. So you won't feel things that you would normally feel. A scratch, even a flesh wound, a gunshot that just is a through and through. You will not feel those things because it's not necessary to your survival. When you look at what you hear, it's called auditory exclusion. You do not hear everything that is going on. And when it comes to your vision, tunnel vision, it goes from wide periphery to you're looking through straws. So on a physiological aspect, that is what the person is experiencing. And so now the officer in this case is expected to process this flawed information and make a decision. So now the decision is made, which this whole OODA loop has been extended, if you're not stress inoculated, to do what they have decided to do. The problem is now your motor skills are largely deteriorated. That's just the way it is when you're in a fight or flight situation. The good thing is that there's an answer, and it's called training. So everyone is talking about the vaccine. The vaccine it's inoculation. It's introducing the body to a very small amount of this virus so that if in the real world you encounter it, your body recognizes it and it can better and more effectively fight it. You apply the same principle to training law enforcement through stress inoculation training, and it addresses the decision-making aspect. It addresses the tunnel vision, the auditory exclusion.
Right.
It makes you think faster and do better, perform better under stress.
So let me ask this: how much training does one have to undertake in order to develop at least the skills to fall back on that you can deal with that kind of situation in the context of policing? Because, we're in this era where everyone's calling to defund the police. Well, defunding the police means also defunding training. Realistically, what are we looking at in terms of how much training law enforcement should have? Because you would rather have these skills and not need them than need them and not have them.
100% correct. And there's no number of hours or number of repetitions answer. It's a little bit of a gray area, but that is why it's necessary to train to a standard established objective. And if that objective is met, great. And if it's not met, then you're not competent to be a cop. At the end of the day, I look at this situation. I don't know the details. They're going to sift themselves out through due process. At least that's how it should be. But looking at it initially and seeing some of the other incidences that happen across our country, a lot of these things could be prevented with training to an objective standard and with making policy changes. And despite the fact that this debate with law enforcement training reform has taken a center stage and is in the spotlight of the national debate about law enforcement training reform, nobody has come up with a solution until now. I can't say much about it, Dana, right now, but later on in the year, Triumph Systems is on the cusp of bringing to market this truly innovative training tool that addresses the implicit bias and the mitigation, the de-escalation, and making that the default action of the police, of making better decision making, arriving at a situation and quickly assessing what's going on and determining threat versus no threat, things like that.
Great. Yeah, that's so unbelievably important. We're talking with Jared Ogden, retired Navy SEAL, CEO of Triumph Systems. Jared, last quick question for you. You've traveled around the country because you work with law enforcement. You advise them. You work with them to increase their discernment, knowing threat or not threat, faster to be able to implement fast judgment, correct fast judgment, and de-escalation tactics as well. What have you discovered with all of the law enforcement that you've worked with? And I realize that, obviously the training that you've gone through is different from what, they're as police, what they go through. But, there's at the same time, there are a lot of things that you and I think military, without militarizing the police, developing that quick judgment, the discernment, the de-escalation. Those are huge things that I think that our police departments could really benefit from. In working with them, what have you discovered their skill level is in those areas?
Well, having traveled the nation and training with a lot of law enforcement, I see a systematic failure from top to bottom for the law enforcement officers to be provided with the training that is necessary. Because you hit the nail on the head. It takes repetition, and repetition leads to muscle memory. Muscle memory leads to instinct, and instinct is the Instinct is to make the right decision before you can articulate how you arrived at it. And in these split second life or death situations, that is what you need to do. You have to default to your level of training, like you said, because you just don't. This isn't the movies. You don't rise to the occasion in these situations. And we have a solution at Triumph Systems for this. If you don't follow us, go ahead and follow us, because we have some pretty amazing updates that we will be sending law enforcement nationwide towards the end of this year.
That sounds great. Jared Ogden with Triumph Systems. We appreciate your service to the country and to the country still, Jared. Thanks so much, my friend. Godspeed to you, and we'll talk with you again soon.
Thank you.